soon mean millions of dollars for producers of wind energy. But in this case, they would be paid not to generate electricity. Now, how in the world does that work? Dan Springer's live in Seattle, Washington. Explain here. What's going on, Dan?
Yeah, it sounds crazy, Bill, but it's actually a problem that a lot of regions around the country might like to have. During certain parts of the year, late spring and early summer, there's actually too much renewable energy in the Pacific Northwest. You got a lot of snowmelt sending tons of water down the rivers through the lots of dams on the Columbia River and what have you. At the very same time, the wind is howling in the Columbia River Gorge, so the wind farms are cranking out maximum energy. As it turns out, too much energy for the demand. So last year, the federal agency that manages the power grid shut down the windmills for 38 days. Now, to compensate the wind power generators for their losses, the Bonneville Power Administration is saying that they will pay them up to $50 million a year, a fee that will eventually be paid by ratepayers.
The solution to too much government is not more government. We already require utilities to buy renewable energy. We require the taxpayers to subsidize the production of renewable energy. And now we want ratepayers to pay the renewable energy companies when they lose money.
And that fee will fluctuate between $12 million and $50 million a year, Bill.
So they get paid either way. Amazing how
That's
that
right.
works. Dan Springer in Washington State. Thank you, Dan. Martha.
I know the question in most of your heads is, what does this news broadcast have to do with me, or ISU? I decided to pick a broader topic and focus on an issue that will be current as we enter the workforce: energy, and more specifically, the present situation of the American renewable energy market. There is a struggle going on across the Northwest between hydroelectricity producers and new wind farm technology. In the growing and evolving renewable energy market, both are fighting to establish their place in the market. How this competition pans out has a huge effect on us as individuals, the environment around us, and the American economy as a whole. Energy is the backbone of any business and subsequently modern society. Business is the force behind most decisions that are made in our country. As business students, the companies that we join in the next few years will be affected by the important decisions of what is supplying our energy. Right now, the renewable energies combined make up over 8% of the energy consumption in America. Let's take a quick look into where each of these renewable resources began in America. The oldest and most traditional form of renewable energy is hydroelectricity. After the election of Roosevelt in 1932, he set in motion huge public works projects to fight the effects of the Depression. The construction of these dams created thousands of domestic jobs for struggling Americans and is what sparked the hydroelectric development, beginning in the West with the Rock Island Dam and then the Grand Coulee Dam. There are now over 15 dams on the Columbia River alone, and the majority of these dams were built over 50 years ago and have been paid off and have relatively low operating and maintenance expenses. The American government 15 years ago took control of the renewable energy market in an effort to encourage wind technology. The government has been stimulating the industry with hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars and have also promised wind companies first preference in the market and, in addition, price floors for their product. This leads us back to the problem brought up in the first news broadcast. Wind farms and hydroelectric dams are unable to coexist together in our area, and unfortunately, you and me are paying the price. The government has created regulations that are not allowing citizens, experts, or the natural forces of demand determine the results of the war of the competing alternatives for renewable energy. For the right decision to be made in the long term, it is essential that the government take a step back and allow the cards to unfold naturally in the renewable resource market. From my research, I discovered 6 valid reasons why government regulations should be removed. The current cost of electricity is inflated due to the government's support of wind technology. Wind energy costs more to produce per kilowatt than hydroelectric power, and these costs are passed on to us, the consumers. Economically, costs would be lowered for all consumers, affecting each of us individually. Collectively, though, lower power costs would draw more business to the Northwest due to the attractive nature of cheap and accessible energy. The issue with the most direct consequences currently is the fact that there is water running through dams unused on our Northwest rivers. Most dams along the Columbia only have 1 or 2 turbines running, but they have the capacity to have 10 turbines running. The potential energy that is flowing by could be a huge contributor to the American economy. and the surplus of power could remove the burden of the extremely dense populations and corporate demand for power in southern states like California. The following problem with the government's regulations regarding wind power I felt would best be demonstrated through a quick clip from another news station.
It's a stimulus wind power boom. Over the past year, building enough new wind farms like this to power 2.4 million homes.
Each one of these turbines costs about $3 million, and they are enormous, about as tall as a 40-story building.
Nearly $2 billion stimulus dollars have been spent to build these things. The problem? Most of them have been built overseas, the jobs outside the United States.
This is a breakdown of the different countries that have companies that have gotten money.
Russ Choma with the Investigative Reporting Workshop has crunched the numbers. Nearly 8 out of every 10 stimulus dollars for wind power have gone to foreign companies.
As you can see, it's just not acceptable understanding the present status of the American economy, and then realizing that money is being sent overseas when it could be spent at home. Now let's take a look at the environmental impact. Wind energy on its own does not leave a large environmental footprint. However, in conjunction with the government wind regulations, there are also limits and rules associated with the flow of water. Dams need the go-ahead or permission from the government before they can change or alter their flow amounts. This has created problems, as the time spent waiting for approval can harm the environment if stable water movement is not observed. Dam reservoirs are continually reaching the point of overflow, which harms the environment unnecessarily. Now I'd like to transition into my fifth and final problem with wind energy. This graph explains the peak hours of energy use in Idaho is between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m., and then compares the capacity each form of energy has for meeting the demand during this time. Hydroelectricity can have a reliable 74% capacity during these hours. Wind, on the other hand, only can reliably produce energy at 5% of its capacity during these hours. The capacity to meet the needs of our city during this time should weigh heavily on the resource we choose to rely on as a community, not only because of the price difference of over $4,000 per megawatt, but also because it is when we are the most vulnerable to energy crisis in the future. After researching the topic as a whole and examining the arguments on behalf of both sides, the information has led me to favor the removal of federal regulations and encouraging the use of the energy produced by dams over wind farms. This stance is based on the economic, environmental, and long-term benefits this decision would bring. This is only my opinion, but I would encourage you to begin forming your own, because the decisions we make in the next 10 years will form what the energy supply of our country looks like in the future.